This Carl Brodbeck putting his apron on that he carries his spiles when he gets ready to tap trees and his hatchet. He pretty quick he'll be coming up here with a drill. He's gonna take his hatchet and chop the bark down a little bit, smooth it up so the bucket will hang straight on the tree instead of tip sideways and spill the sap. He drills a hole in there about 3/4 to an inch and then puts the spile in. Here he's putting chopping the spile in, then they'll hang a bucket on it.
I'm Tim Brodbeck, Carl Brodbeck's great nephew and son of Larry.
Okay, they're taking a picture through the woods where the trees are all tapped and ready to go, and the reason the woods is so clean, the cattle run in the summer. Here comes Carl with the team to gather the sap, and when he stops the horses and he's out carrying in the pails, why he just tells the horses to go ahead. They just follow the path around the woods. He dumps the sap into his pails and then he carries it up and dumps it in they call that a gathering tank. Probably holds about 4 barrels.
My wife Tammy and I bought the farm from Uncle Carl in 1985. We tap maple trees today a lot different than they did in Uncle Carl's day. We began tapping trees again in 1989 with help from my Uncle Russell.
He's unloading the sap now. It's where he does the boiling. This is back in Tim's woods now, or he just does all the boiling right out in the open. Don't have no building. He's putting the wood door.
In the old days, they would just form up with what they call an arch, which is forming up stones or bricks or mud and setting a big flat pan over it, and then just continue to add a lot of wood. It's a slower process, but very effective for them. In 2015, my son Owen has taken over the operation and has modernized production even more than I had. Today, the process is still the same as did in Uncle Carl's day, but with a lot more modern techniques. Today, we gather the sap with pumps, which we installed in 1989. We gather it through a set of tubes to a centralized collection point, and then that sap is then pumped to the sugar house.
This is Ralph and John Letson coming with their team. The Carl and the Letsons are making syrup on shares. Carl was getting tired of doing all the work, so he went in on shares with them. They do help with the tapping and gathering the sap, and Carl does the boiling. Ralph Letson driving the team, and his brother John walking along behind, and their dad gathering the sap for Carl to boil for his work.
The process is still the same, but we help the process along now with a technique called reverse osmosis, a filtering process that pushes a lot of the water out of the sap but retains the sugars. Then you put it through the evaporator. As the name says, it evaporates more of the water.
That's the Letsons unloading the sap up where Carl's going to do the boiling. That was John that just waved to us.
Brother Kevin owns and farms the Letson farm today. Some of the trees we probably tapped today were at least alive in the woods when Uncle Carl tapped. We may or may not have tapped some of them, but they would have been in the same woods at the time. You can begin to tap a tree when it's about 12 inches in diameter, and that tree will be about 40 years of age. The average age of the trees that we tap are probably 70, 75 years old on average. Some of them are probably 140 years old.
That's Carl checking to see if its syrup's ready to take off. You got her boiled down. Is she getting pretty close there?
You know that you're getting close to syrup. You hold the boiling sap, you hold it up and you do it as a drip test, and you drip it off your ladle, and when it starts to form a ribbon, you know you're getting close.
Carl's doing the skimming on the tank right there. Now he's going to dip and see if the syrup's ready to come off. This is Alice cleaning the cheesecloth they drain the syrup through to take the sand out of it.
Sap has made the transition from being sap to syrup at 219 degrees, roughly. It's always 7 degrees above the boiling temperature of water that day.
That's Uncle Carl on the left, and his brother Luther, who works at the railroad station in Woodbury. He comes down to boil for Carl while Carl does chores at night.
Luther later moved to Elma for another job with the railroad.
This is Lutzon's bringing the syrup to the house from the woods. They're bringing Carl his share here. That's Will. This is Carl selling a gallon of syrup. And I believe it's his cousin from Ann Arbor. I don't know for sure. He's getting his money out. There. This is Alice showing up to take the money. Carl's crying because he didn't get the money. Alice stepped out and took it. Now he's going to have a little candy, a little maple syrup candy. He likes it pretty well, don't he? This is the artificial inseminator. His name is Harms, Everett Harms. That's one of the Harms girls getting up on the car. He's going to have a little joke here. He show the inseminator leaving, then he has 2 calves, and he says that's quick results. Carl's got one of his young colts out there. He's going to train it to lead. They got to train them to do what you want them to do, so when you get ready to make them work, you can drive them. Got to be able to handle it. Have them know what you want them to do. Okay, Carl pulled in off the road and he's stuck in the snowbank and tried to push it a little and he couldn't get it, so he went to get his horse out and he drives the horse right from the truck and pulls the truck around where he wants it to go with the horse.
Dad used to tell me about tractors getting stuck in a field and pulling them out with horses. I don't know if that'd be very effective today, and I don't know how many horses you'd have to pull out a tractor today. Uncle Carl married Alice Smith, whose parents had a farm a mile west in Section 11, Woodland Township. They never had any children.
This is Alice's father, Frank Smith, and he lives up to what we know now as Lakewood Estates. Tim owns it.
That's the northeast quarter of Section 11, the west half of that quarter section.
That's Carl pitching stuff off for the sheep to eat up to Lakewood Estates. That's what we know it as of now. That's where he kept his sheep.
The little housing named Lakewood Estates was put in the mid-1960s. And that name came about after the consolidation of the Woodland, Sunfield, Lake Odessa, and Clarksville schools into the Lakewood school district, which Uncle Carl was on the Woodland school board and was probably pretty instrumental in that taking shape.
This is back down where Tim lives. Carl kept the sheep down there. And when Tim went there, he changed that building into a sugar house, which burnt down in, I think, 1993.
Dad was close. The sugar house burnt in 1992, and that was the sheep building, and we had moved that from its former location next to the house, and we had moved it to the east away from the house and started producing syrup in 1989.
Manuel Brodbeck and Paul, his son Paul, my father. And there's Manuel right there on his birthday.
And that's Hugo Wunderlich on the left that he's shaking hands with.
Emanuel Brodbeck is my great-grandfather. Hugo Wunderlich would be Carl's uncle.
That's George Benner, Manuel.
There was George Benner Sr. and Jr. Sr. was Emanuel's son-in-law, married to his daughter Regina. Emanuel died in 1943.
That's Regina, Manuel's daughter, George Benner's wife. And then that's Al Everett and Judy Fisher and Phil Everett. It's Judy Everett there, not Fisher. Sitting on Grandpa's lap.
I'm on the right, Carolyn Brodbeck Breckheisen, Ellen Jean on Emanuel's lap. Elizabeth Ann is on Paul's lap.
That's Paul Brodbeck sitting there.
That's Emanuel and his son Luther Brodbeck.
That's Carl talking with his father.
Helena Benner, Regina, and Carolyn Breckheisen.
That's Florence Brodbeck with a bunch of her daughters, I think. And we're going on down to the Everett family. And Benner. There's Mother again. It's Helena Benner. Weston Everett.
This is Emanuel and Carl's neighbor crossing what is now known as M50. Frank Smith on the right.
That's Phil Everett and his Uncle George Benner. That's his grandma, Regina. That's his uncle and his mother. Young Phil, that's Judy there. That's George Jr. on the left, George Sr. on the right. That's Regina and her daughters. And there's Eston Everett there and Ella. That's George Jr. in the Navy. That's Judy Everett.
Johnny Monty Smith.
George Monty Smith. He worked for Uncle Carl and stayed with him some. He was killed in World War II. Jumped out of the airplane, didn't have his parachutes fastened, got killed. Alice playing the piano.
We have done a lot of remodeling to the house to kind of update it. It was in pretty good shape when we bought it, but it had a Michigan basement. We jacked the house up and put a nice full basement with a walkout in it.
It's Carl going upstairs after he remodeled the house. It's Alice's room upstairs. A few things that are interesting about the house is we have some clippings of funerals being held, or viewings at least, maybe not the actual funerals, but actually had like the viewing or wake in the parlor of some of our ancestors that lived here. I think that's kind of interesting. Carl did his typewriter. He was running for representative. Just after he remodeled the kitchen, his new cupboards. You can see when we remodeled the house, you could see it was definitely built in three distinct periods. The first house had rough-hewn logs that still had the bark on them. They used elm, it looked like, that was about 8 inches in diameter for the framing of the basement. Spool bed. Then you could see where the next time you could see where one side of the log was shaved off, probably by hand, and then in the third phase it was pretty much sawn timber. But most likely all the timber would have been harvested from the native woods on the farm. This is Uncle Luther and Flossie's 25th wedding anniversary party. They're opening the gifts. Looks like they got a new lamp. That's Aunt Regina Benner. That's Paul Brodbeck.
That looks like Jerry Miskey.
They're congratulating them through the line. It's the family.
Florence Brodbeck. Helena Benner. Marguerite greeting her mother and dad. Luther, Eloise, and baby. Ellen Jean and Paul. Caroline Breckeisen and Joyce Miskey. Patty, Margaret, and Mildred Brodbeck.
There's Richard Brodbeck.
Jackie and Glenn Mead. That's my dad, Paul, and myself, Caroline, and Aunt Regina.
Some boys are making mud pies, looks like.
Jerry Miskey on the right and Marvin Brodbeck on the left making mud pies out at Grandma's house.
That's Phil Everett there. Carl Saul, Durock, or Little Piggies. They're loading hay there, and that's Frank King that worked for Carl. Used to live where Kevin lives now. That's an International H driven by Frank King, who worked for Carl. during the summer months. That's Carl mowing hay. You have to watch the dogs so they don't run in front of the barn and cut their feet off. I think this is Carl getting ready to go to the fair. He took sheep and hogs up to the fair in Lake Odessa. That's a horse pulling contest at Lake Odessa. Bird and Stoll's team, Nick and Ned are there. That's the one I remember. Right? That might be Nick and Ned right there. They were that color. That's Hubert Barnum. They're that team of horses. That'd be Phyllis Bitinger's dad. We're back to the parade. The army's coming through now. This is the Lake Odessa High School band at the 4th of July parade. The clown was Aubrey Davis. He used to work at the lumber yard. I'll bring in sheep. He's got his ribbons there. Carl's rode his sheep at the fair and won the ribbons. They're cutting wheat. They've got the green binder and they're putting the wheat in bundles. That's a carrier. It carries enough bundles up till they got enough for a shock, and then they trip it and it puts them on the ground. Now they're loading the hay here. I imagine that's Carl on the load of hay. Looks like him in the back one. I don't know who's helping him. Vic Sadi here, combining oats for Carl. He's a neighbor. That's Vic again with his combine. Here comes the thrashing machine into Carl's to thrash the wheat they were cutting. And that car that's Adam Bitinger's car that just drove in behind the thrashing machine. There they're pitching bundles into the thrashing machine. I think that fellow worked with Victor Eckert. That's Fred Ruther, I'm pretty sure. Here, that's Gene Ruther running the controls on the blower. He puts the straw where the guy on the stack wants it. That's Alice and Gertha Sadi bringing out the goodies for dinner out of the house. Getting ready for lunch for the thrashing gang. This is their washing up for dinner. There's Gene Ruther there on the right. And Fred and Vernon and all of them. That's Vernon just stood up there. They're getting cleaned up for dinner. That's Carl having a break after lunch here. They're talking things over. That's Carl Sadi taking a drink of water. There's Gene back up on top again. That's Vernon Bidinger pitching the bundles up to the guy on the wagon. Here's Vernon. That's Fred Ruther there. Vic Sadi and his wife. Bringing a load of bundles up to the thrash machine. They're carrying the wheat in the gunny sack up to the granary, and then they put it in the bin. They're bagging it up. That's Carl showing off his wheat. So it's oiling up the thrash machine. There they got the thrashing all done. They're up for Carl and they're moving on to the next place. The Model T car there. Vic Sadi's getting ready to fill silo. That's where Joanne Jackson lives today.
That's on Section 2 on the south side. It's basically across the street from Alice's parents' farm, across from what we call Lakewood Estates today, after the development that was put in the 1960s.
They pull the pipe up there by hand, and the fella up on the roof, he swings it in. So it be in the proper place to fill the silo. Loading bundles by hand here.
Farmers used machinery to bind corn into these bundles, and then they picked up the bundles and usually took them and they were chopped and blown into the silos or a pile. I raise corn for grain on the farm now rather than for silage. We don't really keep any livestock on the farm now. In those days, the corn crop would yield about 40 bushels an acre. They probably planted about 12 to 14,000 plants per acre.
That's Carl taking a drink of water, or cider maybe. They're cutting corn with the horses here, putting it into bundles to load on the wagons.
Now, We raise 200 bushels of corn pretty consistently, and we'll plant 34,000 plants per acre.
This binder here that they cut corn with got what they call a conveyor on it, so it puts the bundles right up on the wagon. Guys ride along and stack the wagon load. Don't have to put them on the ground that way. They load them right on the wagon. That's guy there's Maynard Petrie. See the corn come shooting right up on the wagon, right out of the carrier. That eliminated them having to pick them up off the ground.
Over the years, it's been a pretty steady increase in yield from that 40 bushels to the 200 today. You know, we're set our sights even higher every year, trying to position this farm to go for generations farther.
That's Maynard Petrie. He was Victor Egger's hired man. Run the bundles through the silo filler there, and it chops it up and blows it into the silo. This Carl must be bringing up a load of bundles. Now we're back up to the house for Alice's flowers. This up where Tim lives. That's Carl's milk house he's just building there. That's where Tim's boils maple syrup now. There's sugar bush. That's the old water tank right to the north side of the barn. That's the milk house where Tim's sugar bush boiler place, sugar bush thing stands. It's just after they built the road, M43, or M50, I mean.
Growing up, I'd always ride by here, and you always noticed that on the east end of the barn, there was always usually a mural of animals, or it says Brodbeck Acres since 1860. It's always prominently displayed. We've tried to keep that tradition alive by keeping the barn in pretty good shape. And in 2011, we put a mural of a combine on it, and we're expecting that to last for 10 years. And then we have plans of doing something else, but we want to really keep something interesting on the end of the barn.
This is at the church.
In 1956, we celebrated 100 years at Zion Lutheran Church at Woodland. And there's the Lutheran parsonage.
The centennial at the church. Okay, this is my brother Carol at the centennial at the church. He was the historian back then for the church. He wrote up the history of the church. This is a potluck dinner at the church. There's Alice Brodbeck and George Neiman, Reverend Neiman, he was a preacher. That's Alice again.
The second lady is Florence Brodbeck.
That there's Reverend Ness, used to be the preacher at the church back in the 30s. Now we're out in front of the church where the sign is.
In the red dress is Joanne Brodbeck, Joyce Miskey, and Galen Miskey.
There's Carl Hayes, that's Charlie Hayes' brother, Galen Miskey.
Luther Brodbeck Sr., Eugene Cousins, Leslie Smith,
David
Russell
Brodbeck.
Luther Brodbeck Jr., and Fred Ruther,
Russell.
Don McMillan.
They all growed beards for the centennial. Ed Winter. There's Russell Nealon. Gene Cousins there on the left. Gene Ruther.
George Benner Sr.
I think this is in Chicago at the Democratic Convention. Alice and Carl went to. I think they drove down. I see the IBM building. That'd been in the 50s because them were 50s model cars.
Uncle Carl and Aunt Alice, they became very interested. They were staunch Democrats, and they were very active. I know Carl ran for state representative. I think he ran twice for that. He was very active in the party, and he's very proud of his association with Governor G. Menon Williams.
This is Bass Lake, and it was owned by the Lutheran Church of America, and the kids used to go there for 2 weeks for Bible camp, and sometimes they had family camp there, and many times we had our church picnic there, and we'd go there and have church in the barn and have our picnic dinner, and people would swim. And one time it was cold, and so Larry and some of them put on their swimsuits and went yipping down into the water.
Bass Lake was a Lutheran church camp near Greenville. I remember going to that myself when I was young. The land had been donated many years before the camp. The camp has been gone since the American Lutheran Church sold the property, maybe in the 70s.
This is up Brotherhood from the Senate was up to the Bass Lake for a retreat. Quite a few of the men from the church went up. Yeah, there's Marie's car. That's Reverend Neiman standing there, and Reverend Richardson.
Ina Sam Jordan shaking hands with Pastor Neiman.
Reverend Neiman's wife coming down.
With the big purse is Ethelyn Berkeley, and Stella and Earl Engel.
Stella and Earl Engel. Leopold Marquardt there on the right.
Pastor Richardson on the right, Ron Marquardt, and in the black is Reverend Neiman.
Marquardt.
Walter Fisher on the left.
Martha Winter, Mrs. Neiman.
Millard Breckeisen coming out of the church. He is a charter member, and he has his daughter-in-law, Betty Smith Breckeisen.
Lloyd's uncle. Frank Niedammer, Carol Brodbeck, Homer Wells, Russell Brodbeck and Jean Cousin, inspecting the church on a Sunday after church, walking around it.
I am Owen Brodbeck. Tim is my dad. I am proud to be the 6th generation of the Brodbeck family to work the farm. And I am thankful that my great uncle Carl and Aunt Alice were able to preserve some of our family history, farming history, and Lakewood community history.
A few notes from the editor. I am Alan Brodbeck, the great-great-great-grandson of Dorothea and Mikhail Brodbeck. Our narrator, Larry Brodbeck, is my grandfather. I'm a great-great-nephew of Carl and Alice. I have no memories of Carl, but he lived until I was about 12, and I grew up not far from the farm. I first learned of this video some years prior to 2010. Grandpa Larry had let me see the VHS tape and agreed to let me take it to digitize it using a DV converter that I had. Sadly, my DV converter lacked a certain ability to read a bit of data that is encoded on certain video. It determines the brightness level. This was explained to me by a friend named Martin Vipond when I had asked him for help with the digitization process. At the time, I was working for Martin. He was the supervisor of technology at the Lakewood School District, and I was an employee who oversaw network maintenance and server maintenance. And I knew that he had a side business doing video production. I brought the video to Martin, and after I had a hard time using my DV converter on it, and he immediately recognized the video since he actually was the one that Grandpa Larry had hired many years ago to transfer it from 8mm to VHS. Martin had a DV converter that could read that bit and get the brightness level correct. Initially, I took notes of what Grandpa was saying while we watched the video together. I would ask him questions and pause it and write things down. Then I thought I might caption it. I later realized that having him speak into a microphone while we watch it in real time would be a better viewing experience. After a couple recording sessions, I asked Aunt Caroline if she would be willing to co-narrate the video, and she agreed. I did all this on my Grandma Marie's computer because she always relied on me for technical advice, and I have always advised her to buy really good computers with lots of memory and other system resources. I, on the other hand, always have these monstrosities that I piece together from the remains of crashed computers that people give me, but I digress. Partway through the process of editing Grandpa's and Caroline's audio into the digitized video, I became extremely distracted with other things in life, namely my daughter being born, and as a new parent, not having time for side projects. So the video project was put on the proverbial back burner in 2010. And someday my daughter is probably going to find this and think that I am blaming her. I am not. There were plenty of other things that drew me away from the video too, including the false sense of security that I could get back to it any time I want, because now it's saved to disk and it's permanent. Of course, Grandma Marie's computer crashed eventually, and I thought I had lost the project files. I was sure to remove the hard drive before discarding the rest of that old computer. And then Grandpa Larry died in 2019. And I had wished I had finished it before being unable to ask him any more questions. Uncle Tim, in early 2020, started asking me about the video and pushing me to finish it. This was all during the coronavirus quarantine of early 2020. Most of us in these parts don't really give a rip about the quarantine, and so I just went out to a friend named Brian Robatcher to borrow a gizmo that could connect to a serial ATA hard drive and plug it into a USB port. Thankfully it worked, and I was able to get all the movie project files off of Grandma's crashed hard drive. But sadly, her new iMac had a new version of iMovie that was unable to use the old iMovie RC project files. My brother Blake had an old iMac that he didn't use anymore because it was so old it hardly worked at all. Even that one didn't have an old enough version of iMovie. I was able to find a rather hacky version of iMovie HD that would work on Blake's iMac. Grandma's new iMac didn't support 32-bit applications, so I could not use it. But with Blake's, I was able to export a video file of the project, then re-import that one to Grandma's new version. When that was done, I had Grandpa and Aunt Caroline sounding like they were sitting in the same room together talking about the events of the video. I immediately noticed that there were a lot of awkward silences between the things they say. I needed something to fill in those silences. I decided to make Uncle Tim put his money where his mouth is, and I told him I couldn't finish it without some additional information from him. I made him a list of what details I needed, then loaded a voice recording app to his phone and told him to email the audio file to me when he was done. He did, and it was a very nice addition. It still needed a little music to fill some of the silences. Allegretto from Beethoven's Seventh has always been my favorite song, and that's why I started with it. An interesting coincidence was my daughter Margie riding in my old beater car yesterday, even after I had finished an editing session. She found a cassette tape, and even here in 2020, a cassette tape is an antique, basically. And I have a tape deck in this old beater car of mine, and Margie plugged this tape in, and it was a recording of the Lakewood High School concert band from 1994 through 7, the years I was in high school. So I remembered that I have this music of which I am in the band of, and decided that might be a nice touch for the rest of the background music. As I speak this, I haven't actually even put that music on yet. I'm just planning on it. I have always enjoyed history and genealogy. I have no memory of Uncle Carl, but I have the privilege of re-preserving the history that he preserved 40 years before I was even born. I hope this video can make it to the next viewing format, whatever that may be.